The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the endless expanse of the Mojave Desert as I stumbled forward, my cracked lips bleeding, my throat burning like fire. My own family had left me here to die, and with each step, I felt my life slipping away like sand through my fingers. It was 3 days ago when everything fell apart. The argument that started over Thanksgiving dinner had escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. My son's face, twisted with rage and disappointment, still haunted me. "You're dead to us," he had said, his words cutting deeper than any knife. My daughter had turned away, unable to look at me, while my wife of 32 years simply nodded in agreement. They drove me out here, to this godforsaken stretch of desert between Nevada and California, and left me with nothing but the clothes on my back and the weight of my mistakes. The first night was the worst. The desert cold seeped into my bones as I huddled behind a large boulder, listening to the haunting calls of coyotes in the distance. I thought about my childhood in Nebraska, how my father used to take me fishing every Sunday after church. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, someone who hadn't made the choices that led me here. By the second day, the hallucinations began. I saw my late mother walking toward me across the sand, her gentle smile unchanged by death. She reached out her hand, and for a moment, I almost followed her into whatever lay beyond. But something held me back, some stubborn refusal to give up that I didn't even know I possessed. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of sand and scrub brush punctuated by the occasional Joshua tree reaching toward the cloudless sky. My feet were blistered and bleeding inside my worn leather boots, each step sending shockwaves of pain up my legs. The sun was relentless, turning my skin red and raw, while the nights brought a cold so bitter it made my teeth chatter uncontrollably. On the third day, as I collapsed near what I was certain would be my final resting place, I heard something impossible. Music, a guitar's gentle strumming carried on the desert wind, followed by a voice so pure and haunting it made my heart skip a beat. At first, I thought it was another hallucination, but the melody grew stronger, more real, until I could make out the words of an old folk song I remembered from my youth. I forced myself to stand, following the sound across the burning sand. There, sitting in the shade of a massive red rock formation, was a man unlike anyone I'd ever seen. He appeared to be in his 40s, with long silver hair tied back in a ponytail, and weathered hands that moved across his guitar strings with the grace of a master craftsman. His clothes were simple but well maintained, and his eyes held a depth of understanding that seemed to see straight through to my soul. "Thought you might need some company," he said without looking up from his guitar, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. "Name's Marcus, but most folks just call me the troubadour. Been traveling these deserts for more years than I care to count, sharing songs and stories with anyone who'll listen." I wanted to speak, to ask him how he'd found me, but my voice was nothing more than a raspy whisper. Marcus reached into a worn leather satchel beside him and pulled out a canteen, offering it to me without hesitation. The water was warm but tasted like salvation itself as it flowed down my parched throat. "Hey, if this story is touching your heart so far, drop a comment below with the word hope. I'd love to know you're following along on this incredible journey. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more amazing stories of survival and redemption." "Your family left you out here," Marcus said, and it wasn't a question. I've seen that look before, in the eyes of others who've been cast aside by the people they loved most. The desert has a way of calling to the abandoned, the forgotten, the ones society has given up on. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Marcus continued to play. His music seemed to reach into the deepest parts of my broken heart, touching wounds I thought had scarred over long ago. He sang about loss and redemption, about second chances and the power of forgiveness, and with each note, I felt something stirring inside me that I thought had died forever. That night, as we sat around a small campfire Marcus had built with practiced ease, he began to tell me his own story. He had once been a successful businessman in Nashville, with a beautiful wife, 2 children, and a house in the suburbs that was the envy of his neighbors. But success had come at a price, and the pressure to maintain his lifestyle had led him down a dark path of addiction and betrayal. "I lost everything," he said, his fingers absently plucking at his guitar strings. "My wife took the kids and moved back to her mother's house in Georgia. My business partners forced me out of the company I had helped build from nothing. I found myself living in my car, then on the streets, Then finally out here in the desert, where the silence was so complete I could finally hear my own thoughts again. Marcus had been wandering the American Southwest for over a decade, he told me, carrying nothing but his guitar and the songs that seemed to flow through him like water through a riverbed. He'd learned to read the desert like a book, to find water in the most unlikely places, to survive on very little while somehow managing to help others who crossed his path. Music saved my life, he said, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames of our campfire. Not just playing it, but really listening to it, letting it wash over me and carry away all the pain and anger I'd been holding on to for so long. There's something about a good song that can reach places inside us that nothing else can touch. We're getting to the really powerful part of this story now, so make sure you're subscribed because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. Over the following days, as we traveled together across the vast expanse of the Sonoran Desert, Marcus began to teach me things I'd never learned in all my years of living. He showed me how to find beauty in the smallest details, the way morning light caught the spines of a barrel cactus, the intricate patterns left by wind in the sand, the surprising variety of life that thrived in this seemingly barren landscape. But, more importantly, he taught me about the music that exists within every human heart, the rhythm of our breath, the melody of our thoughts, the harmony we can create when we learn to forgive ourselves and others. He had an uncanny ability to see through the walls I'd built around my emotions, to ask the right questions at exactly the right moments. "Tell me about the day it all went wrong," he said one evening as we watched the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. And for the first time in years, I found myself talking about the choices I'd made, the lies I'd told, the trust I'd broken. The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam, carrying with them years of guilt and shame and regret. Marcus listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking a gentle question, but never making me feel like the monster I'd convinced myself I was. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before he began to play a song I'd never heard before, something he seemed to be composing on the spot, weaving my story into a melody that somehow made it sound less like a tragedy and more like the beginning of a redemption story. As we continued our journey, I began to see my past differently. The mistakes I'd made, while still painful to remember, started to feel less like permanent stains on my character and more like lessons I'd needed to learn. Marcus helped me understand that everyone carries scars, that everyone has moments they wish they could take back, but that our worst moments don't have to define who we become. The desert began to change around us as we walked, the harsh Mojave gradually giving way to the more varied landscape of Arizona. We passed through small towns where Marcus would sometimes stop to play his guitar on street corners or in local diners, always drawing small crowds of people who seemed hungry for the kind of authentic human connection his music provided. I watched him interact with these strangers, a waitress struggling to pay her bills, an elderly man grieving the loss of his wife, a young mother worried about her son's future, and I began to understand that Marcus wasn't just a wandering musician, he was a healer, using his gift to help people process their pain and find hope in the darkest moments of their lives. Slowly, I began to find my own voice again. At first, it was just humming along to Marcus's songs around our evening campfire. Then I started sharing my own memories, not just the painful ones, but the good times too. The day my daughter took her first steps, the pride I felt when my son graduated from college, the quiet moments of contentment I'd shared with my wife. During the early years of our marriage, Marcus encouraged me to write down these memories, to turn them into stories, and eventually into songs of my own. I discovered I had a talent I'd never known existed, an ability to capture emotions in words and set them to simple melodies that Marcus helped me refine. For the first time in decades, I felt like I was creating something meaningful, something that might actually help other people the way Marcus's music had helped me. The transformation wasn't instant or easy. There were days when the weight of my past mistakes felt overwhelming, when I wanted to give up and disappear back into the desert. But Marcus was always there, patient and understanding, ready with a song or a story or simply a listening ear when I needed it most. We spent weeks traveling together, moving from town to town across Arizona and New Mexico, sharing our music with anyone who would listen. I learned about the rich musical traditions of the Southwest, the way Native American, Mexican, and Anglo influences had blended together to create something entirely unique. Marcus introduced me to other traveling musicians, people who had chosen to live on the margins of society, carrying their art from place to place like seeds on the wind. But as much as I was growing and healing, I knew that eventually I would have to face the life I'd left behind. The family that had abandoned me in the desert was still out there, still carrying their own pain and anger. Marcus seemed to sense my thoughts before I even voiced them. "You can't run forever," he said one evening as we camped near the ruins of an old Spanish mission. "Healing isn't just about learning to forgive yourself. Sometimes it's about having the courage to ask for forgiveness from the people you've hurt, even when you're not sure they're ready to give it." The idea terrified me. What if they refused to see me? What if they called the police? Or worse, what if they simply looked at me with the same cold indifference they'd shown that terrible day when they drove me into the desert? But Marcus helped me understand that I couldn't control their response. I could only control my own actions, my own willingness to take responsibility for the pain I'd caused. We began making our way back toward California, toward the life I'd tried so hard to escape. With each mile, my anxiety grew, but so did my determination. The man who had been left to die in the desert was gone, replaced by someone who understood the power of music, the importance of forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption even. In the darkest circumstances, the day finally came when we reached the outskirts of the small town where my family lived. My hands were shaking as I stood at the edge of the neighborhood where I'd once belonged, looking at houses that had once been as familiar as my own reflection. Marcus stood beside me, his guitar case slung over his shoulder, offering silent support. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the sound of wind through the palm trees that lined the street. "You don't have to do it alone," Marcus replied, "but you do have to do it. They need to hear your story, to understand how you've changed, and you need to hear theirs, to understand how your actions affected them. That's the only way any of you can truly heal." The walk to my former home felt like it took hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. The house looked exactly the same beige stucco walls, the same red tile roof, the same carefully maintained garden that my wife had always been so proud of. But I was completely different, and I wondered if they would even recognize the man I'd become. My son answered the door, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked older, more tired than I remembered, and there was a wariness in his eyes that broke my heart. Behind him, I could see my daughter and my wife, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and something that might have been hope. "I know you have every right to close this door," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "I know I hurt you all in ways that words can't express, but I've learned some things out there in the desert, about forgiveness and second chances, and the power of music to heal even the deepest wounds. If you'll let me, I'd like to share those lessons with you." The conversation that followed was the most difficult and most important of my life. There were tears, angry words, long silences filled with years of accumulated pain. But there was also something else, a gradual recognition that we were all human beings who had made mistakes, who had hurt each other, who were capable of growth and change and forgiveness. Marcus sat quietly in the corner, occasionally playing soft melodies that seemed to ease the tension in the room. His presence was a reminder that healing was possible, that people could change, that love could survive even the most devastating betrayals. It took time, months of careful conversations, family therapy sessions, and gradual rebuilding of trust. There were setbacks and moments when it seemed like the damage was too great to repair. But slowly, painfully, beautifully, we began to find our way back to each other. I learned that my family had suffered too during our separation. They had struggled with guilt over leaving me in the desert, even though they felt they'd had no choice. They had grieved the loss of the man they thought they knew, while also feeling relief at being free from the chaos my behavior had created in their lives. My wife told me about the sleepless nights she'd spent wondering if I was still alive, the way she'd jump every time the phone rang, hoping and fearing it might be news about me. My daughter shared how she'd blamed herself for not trying harder to help me before things got so bad. My son admitted that he'd been carrying anger not just toward me, but toward himself for the harsh words he'd spoken that final day. As we worked through our pain together, I began to share the songs I'd written during my time in the desert. Music became a bridge between us, a way to express emotions that were too complex for ordinary words. My family was amazed by this new side of me they'd never seen, this creative, introspective person who had emerged from the ashes of who I used to be. Marcus stayed with us for several weeks, helping to facilitate these difficult conversations and teaching us all about the healing power of music. He showed my family the same patience and wisdom he'd shown me, helping them process their own trauma and find their own paths to forgiveness. But eventually, as I'd known he would, Marcus announced it was time for him to move on. There were other people out there who needed his help, other broken souls wandering in their own deserts, waiting for someone to show them that redemption was possible. The night before he left, we held a small concert in our backyard, inviting neighbors and friends to hear the songs that had helped heal our family. As Marcus played his guitar and I sang the words I'd written about loss and hope and second chances, I saw tears in the eyes of people who had known me for years, but were hearing my true voice for the first time. After the last song ended and the guests had gone home, Marcus and I sat together on the back porch, looking up at the stars that had been our companions during those long nights in the desert. "You don't need me anymore," he said simply. "You've found your own voice, your own way of helping others heal. That's the greatest gift anyone can give to the world." In the morning, he was gone, leaving behind only a note thanking us for our hospitality and reminding me that the music would always be there when I needed it. I never saw Marcus again, but his influence on my life continued to grow and spread like ripples on a pond. I began volunteering at local shelters and community centers, using music therapy to help people who were struggling with addiction, family problems, and other challenges. I discovered that my own experience of being abandoned and finding redemption gave me a unique ability to connect with people who felt hopeless and forgotten. My relationship with my family continued to strengthen and deepen. We learned to communicate in ways we never had before, to be honest about our feelings and needs, to support each other through difficult times. The trust that had been broken was slowly rebuilt, stronger than it had been before, because it was based on a deeper understanding of who we really were. Years have passed since that day when I was left alone in the desert to die. The man who stumbled across those burning sands, broken and bitter and convinced his life was over, no longer exists. In his place stands someone who understands that our worst moments don't define us, that redemption is always possible, and that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the deepest pain. I still play guitar and write songs, sharing my story with anyone who will listen. I've learned that everyone has their own desert to cross, their own moments of abandonment and despair, their own need for a troubadour to appear when all hope seems lost. The desert taught me that survival isn't just about finding water and shelter. It's about finding the music that lives within your own heart, the song that can carry you through the darkest nights and lead you back to the light. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you might even become someone else's troubadour, helping them find their own voice when they thought it was lost forever. What do you think about this incredible journey of redemption and second chances? Have you ever experienced a moment when music or art helped heal your deepest wounds? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your stories. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing tales of human resilience and the power of forgiveness. Until next time, remember that no matter how lost you might feel, there's always a song waiting to guide you home.